Hi, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to call this a podcast, and I'm sort of trying to find my medium of doing a podcast, something that's not as structured as my regular presentations, but something that's a little more from the heart and a little more spontaneous. However, I have found that if I'm just going to spontaneously spew in front of a camera, it tends to be a little bit, in my view, a little more nonsensical. How's that? So I need some structure to coordinate my sequence in terms of logic, just a little bit. So there'll be a little structure here. So for me, there'll be some screenshots, and also if you're actually watching this, there'll be some screenshots as well. But you don't have to watch this. This isn't something like, do you see this? Do you see that? It will be something primarily a crutch for me. Okay? So today I really wanted to talk about, I had a death in the family. It wasn't immediate family, but it was an in-law. But it was somebody that I had known since I was 8 years old. So he was an adult when I was 8 years old, because I have older siblings. I'm the youngest of them. So, and he was always kind of a celebrity. He ended up being a minister. And he practiced being a minister. And I saw sort of the rise and fall of an individual. And it reminds me a lot of me, but most people that I see, that, you know, they go through the struggles of life, they get into the family and the work or whatever their thing is, but they get locked into it and it really starts to kill them. And when you see these people medically, they come across as usually like, I can't sleep, I can't do this, but it's never all that deep. You know, it's, can you make my sore toe go away? Can you make my knee better? And so consequently, your practice is kind of a triage. It's take the thing that they want fixed and focus on it, but you don't get very deep. You really don't, even though I required all my patients to come up with a diet diary, you don't get too deep into nutrition. There's only so much time. I mean, you're on the clock, it's covered by insurance, and so it's in and out. They spend a lot more time with me than they would conventional medicine, like 45 minutes, but I can't do a lot of the things that I would want to get into their life to make it better. And so what are these connecting thoughts? Is that there's a point that it came to this individual, in my perspective, that he obviously didn't want to stay around. He ended up getting prostate cancer, and I think by the time he was diagnosed, it was metastasized to his bones. That's about as much as I know about it. But well before that, like a decade or two, I saw their diet was clearly not great, and I could see he had a intentional tremor, and things that needed to be attended to. But if he didn't care, what's the point of bringing that up, right? What's the point of me saying, hey, it would be great if we had a panel on this, or did some? If they're not interested, you can't go further than their interest. They have to be the one driving the cart. They have to be the one on the horse of their own health. And that's pretty much the limitation. So why do I say this? Is because when I get into these various topics that I cover in my YouTube channel, it really is for people that want to find out a deeper level of something they can do. I try to end up with something actionable information they can take home, like an assignment they got in elementary school. I can go do this at home and I will get better to an extent. It will open a door for me to ask more questions and to get more answers and to have a greater understanding. The core, if there is one word, one concept that I wanted everybody to get, that would be self-awareness of your state of health. And you could say, well, I meditate and I stretch and I feel pretty good. Well, if nothing bothers you and you feel it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not saying you have to get labs that and you have no particular motivation to go get them. Then don't get any of these labs. Don't engender my earnest appreciation and involvement in data-driven decision-making, which is your labs, your different kinds of labs. I don't think it's over your head. I don't think you need to be a doctor to understand that. Obviously, it helps because I had to have it crammed down my throat for so many years, to pass so many tests. You didn't and you don't. However, I think to ignore it and to say, oh, that person's going to take care of it for me is being kind of irresponsible. So with that, about 6 or 7 years ago, I developed kind of an integration of certain labs. I've only brought certain people into it. It's how I work with people now. I used to have some courses on this. Right now, I don't have the the willingness to put together a group of 5 or 10 people. And so what it is, it's called the Biointegration Code. I made that up because it has to do with 4 panels that I'm going to show you about. But I would get people to come in, pay me, usually 5, or then I got up to about $8,000, 12-week program, about $1,600 of labs that you will see. And I would integrate them over that period of time while following their diet, while they're wearing a CGM, which is a continual glucose monitor. So I would really have a sense of who they were. And we'd put these together. And that was really important. So I wanted to show you some of the labs. I wanted to show you the foundation of the data collection that I do on anybody who works with me now. But this isn't about working with me, and this isn't a pitch for my program because I don't know when that's going to be, but this is how I work with people now. You can do this with your healthcare practitioner, with your doctor, whatever. I want you to bring up your level of understanding about these topics. This is, in essence, the audience that I'm talking to, those that are concerned. So I think back to my brother-in-law who passed. It was all his decisions. You know, he's a wiser person and chose not to pay attention to it. Didn't, eating all the wrong foods and became diabetic. All this was very predictable. I could see this a long time ago. But he wasn't engaged in wanting to be healthier. That wasn't part of his life. He just let that part slip away. So let's get started. I'm looking at this right now. So the Biointegration Code, I call it hormonal because there's a hormonal panel, you'll see. Genomic, we look at your polymorphisms. Nutrients, intracellular micronutrients. Metabolic, which is a panel that I put together primarily through LabCorp now, and it used to be through Quest. It's just a little bit cheaper, and I'm used to working with LabCorp. I think they're a little more the way I do it. But there's nothing against Quest in that. So that's it. So Biointegration Code, I think that's very important. Meanwhile, they track their diet on chronometer, so I get to see that. And they wear a continual glucose monitor, so I get to look at the patterns of their blood sugar, right? Their glucose. And this allows me to sort of see where is the biggest problem. Where is the biggest rock in their bucket that I can take out and lighten their load so they will kind of discover a kind of health that they haven't had before. So that's it. Perhaps I'm speaking a little bit too simplistically, but that's what I do. And so 4 panels, metabolic, nutrient, hormonal, genomic, I think they fit together. So whether you're an autistic kid or whether you are dyslexic like myself, whether you have some sort of autoimmune, this still comes together. I need these 4 panels. I need to see how you eat and have eaten, and I need to track you for a while. These things, if I can get these variables, it really allows me a handle that I never had on really any of the patients that I saw over 16 plus years, because there's only so much time and insurance only covered X amount of their panel, of their blood panel. So from that, I'd have to project. How are you feeling? Great. Let me see your diet. Okay. Oh, you didn't give me a diet diary? All right. We can't talk about that. So if they're not into it, if they're not interested in being healthy, I can't saying, oh, I think we should do all these other things. If they're not interested and they're not motivated, my best patients were cancer patients and parents of autistic kids, because they were really focused on what can they do to change the situation that they were in. So everything mattered, and they did listen, and they did perform, and they got better for the most part. Okay, again, metabolic, custom panel, LabCorp or Quest, intracellular, and a lot of times people try to get this done through their doctor, try to get it done through their insurance company, and I've never seen it work completely. Their doctor might do half of it. They wonder, why do they have to do this? Why do they have to do that? And they probably have never done glucagon, probably have never done insulin-like growth factor, probably have never done a few things they think is weird. Or they'll argue with me about, why are you doing a lab panel? So I tell people, this is what I want. You either, we get it now, and the cost of these are about $500 a panel. It's not quite, some are a little bit cheaper. But all in all, I think the total cost for labs are about $1,600 or $1,700 just on the lab cost, and I get nothing out of that. Nutrient panel at Spectracell, intracellular. Dutch, that's the precision analytical, and it's called for dried urine, the comprehensive hormone panel. That's where they get that acronym. I like that a lot, and we'll get into why. And then SNPs, of course, single nuclear polymorphisms. A lot of people have had 23andMe already done. So with that, the 23andMe, I have them take the raw data, send it over to Strategy, who I use. And if they have their own company or whatever they want to use, go use that. I mean, their genes are their genes. It's not like I'm going to get a different gene. So I'm not really worried about them, doing what I want them to do. But if they have 23andMe, I say go send it to a Strategy and show them how to do that for, I think it's $80. And then I get a report. They get a report, I get a report. And then I go through that and I link it into their blood work, their hormone panel, their intracellular, and it's very, very helpful. And their diet and their CGM. Okay, so this is what the Spectracell looks like. Spectracell is actually it's a list of, I'm going to pause for a second to show you something else. So Spectracell looks like this. Basically, it's a long list, and it takes, I would say, 4 weeks, and you have to get, it's not a lot of blood, actually, just a couple of vials. You send it in, it's a kit, and it takes about 4 to 5 weeks to get this back. I tell people 4 weeks after the blood draw, and this is what I like about it. It sort of outlines relative to B vitamins, amino acids, other minerals, carbohydrate metabolism. It's a long list. You can see here, and I'll show you where I put it on a big spreadsheet, of course. But, are they deficient? Are they fine? Or are they borderline deficient? Pretty straightforward. And it lines it up that way, and I'm so appreciative. Obviously vitamin C, things that you would know about. But this is intracellular, mind you. It's not serum, it's intracellular. It's a whole different world when you look at intracellular, and it's very, very helpful. And it's a good cross-reference from polymorphisms to general nutrition and their diet. So if they're tracking their diet, I can sort of get to see the intersection. So in a word, this is sometimes called how they actually are presenting, right? Their actual presentation of their blood work. This is their phenotype. The genotype would actually be their polymorphisms in their genes. So this is the part that changes on a per diet basis on who they are and so on. So it's a good piece of the puzzle to have. Okay, so this is what Spectracell does with their data. They put this in the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. They're the same name. 2 different names for the same thing. It basically shows you the red or the deficient, the yellow or borderline deficient, and the green. These are all the things they tested for. They're saying, so how capable are these people, this is you now, right? They're micronutrients. So how capable or not capable? Where are the deficiencies? Are these deficient vital deficiencies and they're going to have a problem? So this is how I express it to people. I say, this is the Krebs cycle. This is where you burn your fats, your carbohydrates, your protein, where you make your energy, right? Where you make your ATP, in essence. It's the factory where you make all this for you in terms of energy. Krebs cycle specifically. And so I tell people who go, I don't know about this, now we just got real complicated. I said, no, pretend this is your sprinkler system for your house. This little diagram here is a sprinkler system, and all the red spots are leaks in the sprinkler system. And all the yellow spots are small leaks in the sprinkler system. Now we're going to turn on the water, and do you think all the plants that you have in your garden are going to get watered, or do we have a problem here? And so they would look at, like this one here, there's a lot of red, so you go, I think some plants are going to die. Right? That's how it is. So we get that concept across. This is important. They're all technically called cofactors, vitamins, nutrients, and so on that help with this. So they're cofactors. So also it puts this other diagram, this now puts it into, this is the methylation or methionine cycle, the folate acid cycle, but collectively this is called your methylation cycle. And here's where you make your glutathione. I've used this on a number of videos because I love the simplicity, how they illustrate it. It brings the relevance of these deficiencies right to the person. Again, we use the sprinkler system analogy. Here's your sprinkler system. Do you think there's going to be, or traffic circles, do you think there's going to be, and if I say the red here are traffic jams or an accident, we go, well, what traffic circle do you think is going to be completely jammed up and not work very well due to the red circles, due to the deficiencies? They go, well, probably this one. Yeah, absolutely. So this one here happens to have glutathione deficiency and a few others, and we can guess that. Okay, so now they're getting the idea that it is valuable for them to see the bigger picture. this is a small little piece of the panels I'm going to show you a bigger piece of, but I've used this on many videos to get a larger picture, a larger context. I can't just do the big toe anymore. Your big toe hurts. I don't know, is that gout or did you hit it with a hammer? Is that a uric acid thing or is that something else? So we need to have, so what I encourage people to go, well, wait a minute, you know, we're not going to have the working knowledge to understand your spreadsheet of labs. I get that. But to buy into the concept, to be able to access the concept that this is usable information for everyone to have. And it makes for a more intelligent conversation between, if you want to call yourself a patient or a client, whatever, and your doctor and your physician, your healthcare worker. You have this working vocabulary and you can ask questions about it. And so that's how you have a healthier relationship. The health coach or doctor, whoever, I know it's all dependent on personality and degree of education and specialty, all of that. However, they can help assess you of your data, and that's what you're looking for. That's what, so when I come back to, this is, once you get these panels down, it's easier to say, either you use this data to convince somebody to make a change in their life, if I'm thinking about the person I just told you about, it's like, you know, I can verify, even though they have doctors, and their doctors didn't tell them there was a problem. Jeez. Gets to the point that ministers know everything. Or other doctors know everything. And you go, well, actually, it is a problem, and here's 3 or 4 studies, and you just send them links. It's pretty easy to sort of help convince them that maybe we shouldn't be having cream cheese on English muffins every night and every morning. That might not be the best way, you know, or whatever it is, right? And we can, data matters, data is useful, and when you present it, it's really about, do you want to live a vital life or do you not? And if you don't, well, that's a whole nother separate issue of why don't you want to? We all get to the tail end of life. Do we get there because we're bored, because we're ill, because we just are too encumbered with pain? I don't know, but I can work with some of that, and this data matters to give us a healthier life to the end and be a better influence around other people. That's basically what I do. So that's why this data matters. Okay, so this is opening up the basic, what I called Keto Naturopath Assessment Panel. That's blood work through LabCorp. And this is just, you know, half a page of many pages of labs, and I'm not trying to blind you with it, but I'm saying it's important to be comprehensive. And the reason I present it this way, which is something I probably should have done 20 or 30 years ago when I was practicing with all this in front of me, however small that panel was, is the comparison to other people that they do not know. These are, you know, they're unidentified, so we're not invading anybody's privacy, but they get to see, you know, where their numbers are relative to other people, and that has been very helpful. When I get to talk about the size of red blood cell, I get to explain it relative to other people, and since I know the initials that I put up there, I get to know those particular cases. Oh, you're like this other 40-year-old woman, or this 70-year-old woman, or this, you know, 34-year-old guy, and so on and so forth. So the comparisons are very helpful, whether we're talking about uric acid or we're talking about, here we go, triglycerides, HDL, or the ratios that I run, triglyceride, HDL, insulin resistance, total cholesterol. I also get to show how cholesterol is really not that, total cholesterol is really not that important. We get to go into inflammatory markers, glucose, insulin, glucagon, et cetera, liver panel, of course, omega-6 panel, of course, kidney panel, and so vitamin D, carnitine, things you're probably not familiar with. I'm not going to go through all this, but it helps me have this data. And so all this red down here where people are out of range, and when people start seeing that they're out of range, but see correlations with other aspects, like maybe their omega-6 3 panel there's consistently across the range of people who have high, or they're insulin resistant or close to insulin resistance or something like that, and they've concurrently had a very bad omega-6 3, very high 6-3 ratio, but they can correct that both with diet and correct that both with taking a supplement. That would be promising. That would be encouraging to them. It wouldn't be a big deal. They won't have to, you know, change their whole life, but they can start changing some of it. So this particular panel that I redo the data all the time, and I've compared it to homocysteine. So I intermittently keep reposting the homocysteine relative to insulin, relative to omega-6-3 panel, relative to vitamin D. So people get the idea. Also down here, this is why I've inputted, in some people's, all of that Spectracell data, right? So now I get to see what deficiencies do they have. I also saw those diagrams that Spectracell did. And of course, they put on whatever medications they're on or supplements that they were taking. So this data matters, especially if they're on medications. You know, did it drive certain deficiencies? This is what I think is a comprehensive way of looking at health without being so complicated and so esoteric. It's usable, it's actionable both for the practitioner, which is me in this case, and for the recipient, the client or the patient. It puts common sense in front of them and gives them their responsibility to change these things and why they would make some changes. Okay, this is the hormone panel that I wanted to give you a brief overlay. This is generic. It's not attached to anybody. In fact, it's one of the dummy samples that the company sent me a while ago. But why I use this, so it goes through, and what this says over here, this is your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We look at them with both genders, and they're important in both genders, of course. We look at cortisol and cortisone. What I like, this chart here, and this is of a fictional person, menopausal, postmenopausal person, and this is their cortisol level. So they're pretty much within range. They're just a little bit out of range here. But I've seen I've seen people who don't even get in range at all. That means they are so exhausted that their cortisol, I've identified that as the primary target to address, and that is adrenal insufficiency. They're working their way towards Addison's disease. Addison's disease is when you cannot make enough cortisol. So President John F. Kennedy had that. George Bush I had that towards the end of his life. And it starts losing control and you start getting sick in other ways. They obviously make cortisol, so people take cortisol shots, and that's how that is addressed in the conventional medicine, the cortisol. There's other, so before you get to that extent and that kind of take cortisol shots, which is pretty dramatic, pretty deficient, there's other ways to address this. But this puts it on the board of should it be addressed or not? Is there enough organ reserve? Are your adrenal glands shot and you are not functioning enough? Because if you don't have enough cortisol, you do not have enough organ reserve. I'm speaking very specifically of adrenal glands here. If you don't have enough organ reserve, you're going to be wiped out all the time. And it then starts to be a problem. And other people I've seen are screamingly above this. So that means they have the capacity, right? So now I have their cortisol is out of range in terms of out of range, way too high. What do you do with them? It's obviously not a deficiency situation. It's an excess. Speaks to lifestyle for the most part, maybe an environmental exposure, but in terms of reality of who people have that, it hasn't been about environmental exposures. It's been about consistent, unrelenting stress in their diets, in their lives, that really has to be intervened upon, because what happens is you do then switch over and you burn out. As we all know, burnout means in this case of data, contextual awareness, is that they will get to insufficiency. And it's the adaptation of stress. Hans Selye's 3 stages of adaptation. Let's say you're smoking, you cough, you can't smoke, but then you get to kind of like it. You get to adapt to it. And then people smoke for decades. And they do just fine. And then they get lung cancer. What happened? Well, they were doing fine for decades, so they will tell you, and I get this story all the time. But their body steps up, amps up, and starts making sure that the negativity, all the bad things in cigarette smoke don't affect them. But then your adrenal glands can't keep up, and you weaken, you exhaust yourself, and that's when the cancers and so on and so forth happen. You start to fall apart. So the 3 stages of stress, that's it. So those people that are excess, they are in the first stage, and they're going to maybe adapt to it, but then they're going to burn out. Let's say I look at how testosterone converts to estrogen. That's a big deal, especially in insulin resistance. Anybody who's worked with me and anybody who works with people realizes that insulin itself would quickly convert testosterone to estrogen. And that's why men who are insulin resistant have gynecomastia. They have breasts because they are estrogen rich and testosterone poor. not in production sense, but it gets converted very quickly. It doesn't hang around as testosterone. So these are the things I look at. I look at melatonin, DHEA production, which is along the cortisol line of things. Okay, so this is the genome process that I go through very quickly. So we're assuming they were probably 23andMe and they took their raw data, they sent it over to Strategene, and that's what we're looking at. This is 118 pages, ballpark call it 120. So it gives you a number of diagrams that seem like, oh my gosh, it's too much information. The more you get to see it, the more it makes sense. And so this is your methionine cycle and your folate acid cycle, and there's your PEMT. Remember the choline, we've talked about processing choline, and DAO, which is your histamine, and how that relates, your glutathione down here. So it means nothing to you. So what I do is I go to, this is what they call advanced tables. These are all the polymorphisms, mutations that they test for, and they simply made their own kind of names for these panels. And you'll see some of these are mutations are on the different panels, but they try to isolate it to make a little more sense for the person viewing it. I go through and I scratch off all the things that they don't have, which all these are minus means they don't have that mutation. So I take all those out and I look at if they have some important ones. This is me we're looking at. So what do I have? I have here folate. I have a lot of folate problems. I'm dyslexic, so it makes sense that I have homozygous for MTHFR C677T, MTHFR-D. How's that? Heterozygous, homozygous for another. And then I look over here for some other neurotransmitter ones that could be a problem. And here's other ones that have to do with, they call it SAM. It's really part of the methionine cycle. I also see it as very much involved in B12 and folate acid cycle. So you look for what that person has there too. Where are they slowed up? Where are they boxed up? And it's just very helpful to go through. So I look at the pluses first. Are there some, and not, these are not all equal. There are a few things that few areas that I look at, but this allows me to look at what do they have? What should I focus on? And are there any correlations with their blood work? Are there any correlations with their intercellular deficiencies? Are there any correlations with how they're manifesting organ reserve, their cortisol, their estrogen to testosterone? And putting these together is the biointegration code, if you will. It's anybody's code. You put these together, and with the CGM results, with their data of their tracking of their diet, you get a really good sense of who that person is and where they can concentrate in their life to make a change. More than likely, they've showed up to you, to me, because it's a problem. Nobody just shows up here, they're curious. I'm curious how I would look. If they don't have a problem, it's hard to find a motivation in that kind of individual. So usually it's overweight, or usually they've had a uric acid problem. You know, they've had gout sometimes, maybe not all the times. They realize there's a way of avoiding that. They've seen their parents, or their parents have been examples of their dementia or Alzheimer's or so on, and they want to, or had a heart attack or something. These are their motivating factors to look into this deeply. So I wanted to put all that to you. So I just want to close saying this is what tracking their diet looks like. They put it in Chronometer. I get to see it. I get to look at it macros, of course, which is right here. I get to look at it in micros. Chronometer is okay. You know, is it the best? You know, it allows me to look more specifically at what they're eating. So I get to break it down into whatever I want to look at the ratios of the food they're eating, whether it's fatty acids or vitamins and so on, certainly choline and B12, folate are things that I look at. What are they getting too much of if they are getting too much of something? And that's a big deal. So putting these things together really brings us right back to where we started. This is what we're doing. So I want to bring it right back to the beginning, because this is what we're doing. It's the biointegration code. It should be your code. It's certainly my code. Hormonal, genomic, nutrient, metabolic, track the diets and the CGM. You know, we basically have a good understanding of this person. Do they work out? Do they not work out? What kind of workouts do they do? So it's a lot of fun, actually. The data-driven-ness of all this is something I'm really interested in because it's valuable, but also it's not so esoteric people can't understand it. You know, we now put it together, and they have, you know, reviews, and I send it off to people. If they ask questions, you know, they get a deeper understanding, which they all do. And so this is what we're doing. We're putting things together that haven't been put together for the most part before, but should, in my view. And that's how we come up with what is the best thing for you. Not everybody has the same road. We do have bio-individuality. You bet. We have a lot of commonalities, such as we all need to breathe oxygen. If we stop doing that, we will die. We will all die. So when we start backing away from some of those big, obvious commonalities to dietary differences, to genomic differences, meaning polymorphisms, now we're into something. And we throw in labs on top of that, it's a good fit. So that's my podcast for today. I hope that was helpful, and it gives you an understanding when I talk about these things and I show you these things in the videos that I do. This is where I get that data, and this is why I believe in that approach. Until next time. Hi, I just forgot to mention that, while you're listening to these different episodes, whether they're from a long time ago or something I'm doing currently each week, feel absolutely free to send me a question. Say, hey, while I was listening to you, this is what I thought. What are your takes on this? The reason I'm asking you to do that often opens up a whole avenue of thinking and thoughts, and even something I can explore for a future episode. So from a simple question to something more complicated or explain your situation, I won't get back to you necessarily right away in a couple hours, but give it a couple days, maybe even a week or so. But I pretty much get back to everybody who has a legitimate question, and I give them a legitimate answer. And sometimes if I don't know or can't give them a very specific answer, I say, I will look into it and I'll make an episode of this. So feel free to communicate. I hope you enjoy what we're going over. This is meant to be you and me on a walk together. Kind of, I'm talking to you, but you can talk back to me should you want to. Till next time, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.